Good afternoon. Sorry, I just got on here. I just wanted to quickly. All right, there. Sorry, I had to write a note down. Okay, so thought I'd share a little bit about how I'm going about actually planning my my curriculum plan for this coming year, and it's almost done. And so I thought I'd just share. Hello. See, I never know what to call you. Dells. Is that what it is? I think that's what it is, right? Yes. Thank you. Because I always get your name wrong. Okay, hold on. My papers are running away. I had to write down my ideas because I can sometimes forget. Okay. So, I have a question for you. How do you plan your homeschooling educational plan? Like the books that you choose and how you're going to do it and all those things without becoming overwhelmed. It's a big question because it can be scary sometimes, right? Actually, I have always thought it was scary, to be honest. For many years, it was scary because you want to do it right and you want to be effective, and that's all good. But I've learned some things along my road. I've been on it for 13 years, and I've learned some good things. So I wondered about how to plan my homeschooling plan without getting overwhelmed for many years. I hummed and hawed, and I just didn't know really how to do it without the overwhelm. In my case, I would often overfill my kids' education with too much, and then we'd have to start cutting, and which is not a bad thing because you're not going to miss out on anything, but it can be a lot for the kids. But the reason why I did that was because I felt trapped to plan my educational plan based on what the experts said, and really that's not bad, but it's not the best. Let me explain. Okay. It's okay to read what the experts say. It's okay to learn from them. But it's how you go about reading and how you go about learning that's important from them, those experts, whether they're a philosophy like the Charlotte Mason philosophy, where Charlotte Mason writes in her books, her 6 volumes about education, whether it's somebody on a blog and they're sharing their experience, whether even me. Like, you have to be careful how you receive the information and use it, okay? Because the point of educating our children is to educate them, not to fall prey to doing things perfectly or follow someone's ideas because they're an expert. Does that make sense? That's the wrong motive. And so the whole point of educating our kids at home or even in the public school is to educate our kids. So that's the purpose. And that's what we have to always keep in mind. So the first thing that I always encourage new parents or people who have been homeschooling and struggling is you have to know, it's not an easy task. You have to know your kids. You have to know your family. You have to know your children. And I'm going to be honest, a lot of us don't know our kids really well because we're so busy. We're going from, activity to activity, and, we're cooking and we're cleaning house and we're working, and we know our kids, but we don't fully know them. Does that make sense? And we have to slow down and really learn our kids. And that takes time. It takes effort. And so really learn your kids' strengths, learn their weaknesses, and their likes, their dislikes, their dreams, their concerns, their behaviors, their character. You have to learn a lot about your kids in order to really know who they are. Okay? And that means this closes and you just ask questions. okay? And you observe, a lot of listening and observing, lots. Because the whole point is for our kids. It's not any other reason. We're not homeschooling so that we can look good. We're not homeschooling so that we can follow a philosophy and say that we did this thing perfectly. That's the wrong motive. And I'll be honest with you, I fell prey to that kind of stuff sometimes. And we got to be careful. We got to really watch our motives and our purpose in homeschooling our children. And why do we fall prey to these things? Well, the first reason I fell prey to it was because I lacked knowledge. When I first started out, it was all new to me, and it was scary. You're like, I have no experience. I lacked knowledge, and I did follow what the experts say. I was following this one expert, but she repeatedly, ironically in the book, she repeatedly said you have to fit it for your family. And I didn't take that part. I was just like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it really well. Okay. Because I'm a bit of a perfectionist in that area. So I was just going to do it really well. And frankly, we had a great first year in homeschooling. We've had many good years in homeschooling because I would go and do it really well. But as they get older, it gets harder because you're doing too much. And when they're littler, when you start grade 1, grade 2, it's not so bad to do everything. It's not as hard because the content is not hard for us as parents. But as they get older, it gets harder because we don't know that content. And so you have to be careful. And then there's also the lack of confidence because we ourselves were not educated this way, but also because we don't know a lot of this stuff. Like when I started out, I hated world history, hated it. Like I didn't want to learn world history as a kid when I was in school, and I actually got to avoid it. There was a lot of things I didn't want to learn. But when I started homeschooling my kids and learning why, you learn about world history, it made so much more sense. And then when I started reading stories for world history, it was way better than what I did in high school or in the school. Like it was way more interesting. And so you gain confidence and experiences by doing it. But it really helps to have that knowledge of why you're doing it and what your purpose is. And which leads me to the second point is you need to gain a knowledge. And the key when you're planning your homeschooling is to learn the principles. First your purpose, and then the principles of education. So often we start learning the how-to. Oh, I had almost lost it. So often we start with, how do you do this? How do you teach math? How do you teach history? How do you teach English? There is a place for that, but that should not be where we start. And that's where we all like to start because it's comfortable. If I can get the how-to, then I'll get it. Well, yeah, you can get it, but you'll still miss a lot because when you come to a challenge, you won't know how to adjust, and you will not know how to tweak it to fit your family. And that's why you need to learn the principles of education, because if you know the principles, you'll be able to tweak the practices, because principles are set. They don't change. Truth is truth. It never changes. But how you apply that truth matters. And in certain situations, it will be applied differently, but it's still the same principle, and we'll still get the same results. But it's just applied differently. So you need to start with the principles. And when you know what the principles are, everything else will be clearer. Your goals, what practices to use, what curriculum to use, and things will begin to fall into place as you plan. And so, for instance, I use the 20 principles of Charlotte Mason, and there's 20 just simple principles. They are very clear. It takes time to read about them and learn them, but they're very clear, and I use those principles, and the practice gets adjusted to my family based on my family. So for instance, she talks about using short lessons. So in grade 1, she says they usually do 15 to 20 minute lessons. That's grade 1 to 3. Grade 4 to 6, it's like 30 minute, 20 to 30 minute lessons. And then grade 7 to 9, it's like 45-minute lessons. And in my home, I have 3 kids, grade 7, 5, and 1 this year. No, grade 7, 5, and 2 this year. And we all learn together. I do not have my kids reading their own books all by themselves. I read the books with them. And so in our home, I have a child that's supposed to be spending 45 minutes on a lesson. I have another child that's supposed to be spending 20 minutes on a lesson. How do you do that when you have a variety of ages in your homeschooling, right? Well, the principle is short lessons, but it's got to fit my family. So we learn together. We read the material together. So what I do, instead of saying, okay, my oldest child is going to read 45 minutes on his own of this book, and then my younger one is going to read the same book, but only 20 minutes, we read the book all together. And I plan out the days based on the pages and so on and so forth, and then we read it together. We take turns reading, but we read it together. And frankly, my younger child gets pulled up to the higher level in terms of her attention span. We often are doing 30-minute lessons, and honestly, that's often what we need. Sometimes we need a little longer, and she doesn't really suffer from it. If I notice she's phasing out, it's usually when we start discussing the topic at the end. So I let her be free. I let her go and color or whatever she wants to, do while she's waiting for the next subject to come on. And that's okay, because she's at the level of just being exposed to what's going on, to become familiar with the content. She doesn't have to remember every single detail, whereas my older kids, I want them to have more of a solid understanding in terms of the concepts, the ideas, the cause and effect of what happened in world history from one situation to another. And so we will be spending more time together. So does that make sense? I'm not necessarily I'm not making my grade 7er do 45 minutes solid of lessons just because Charlotte Mason said it. No, I'm using the idea of, okay, generally my grade 7 should be around 45 minutes. My grade 2 should be around 20, 30 minutes max. Okay, so let's vary this. Let's see how many pages we have to do every day, and then I know how fast they read, so this is how much time we need. And I'm okay with that. I used to struggle and fret about my oldest not doing the 45 minutes. I used to fret about that. And that is not the point. We are not to be following the law of the letter. We're not. That is not the point. The point is to take the principles and apply them to your family so that they fit your family, so that you can educate your children effectively. So does that make sense? I hope that makes sense, because a lot of us homeschoolers get stuck in following the letter of the law, and I'm famous for it. Like, seriously, I'm seriously famous for it. And so I've learned this, and it's been really, really helpful for me. I'm just going to change my hands here, and actually, a lot of us human beings fall into this trap. And we have to be thinking and following principles, because when you follow principles, things become so much clearer, and you can weed out the temptation to follow what somebody else is doing, or you can weed out the wrong motives, and you can keep it what it's supposed to be. Keep the thing, as my favorite Charlotte Mason blogger lady does, Nancy Kelly. So I hope she can watch this. She's wonderful. If you guys ever want a good Charlotte Mason mentor, go to see her, Nancy Kelly. Her website's called sageparnassus.com. Fabulous woman. Okay, moving on. How do how do you plan each subject? Okay, so for my philosophy that I use is called Charlotte Mason Philosophy of Education. She lays out the actual practices in her books, in her 6 volumes for each subject. And generally they're very straightforward, okay? But when you're planning your subject, you want to know a few things. You want to know why you're studying that subject. Don't just say, well, I'm going to study that subject because I'm supposed to give a feast to my kids. Well, that is true, but I'm sorry, I lost my papers. But you want to know specifically, why are you learning math? What is it for? Why am I learning world history? What is it for? And what is my child supposed to get out of world history? What is my child supposed to get out of science? What is my child supposed to get out of math? What is the purpose of that subject? And so know the why, the purpose of each subject you're doing. So for instance, in science, Charlotte Mason says you are wanting your child to develop wonder about God's creation and ultimately, that's the word. Ultimately, you want your child to be in awe of our Creator. And so that is a purpose for our science. So that you have to always keep in mind, right? And then you want to learn the principles of a particular subject. How can I teach the subject with its principles? And because if you know the principles, it makes the practice make more sense. The practice is more meaningful to you. When you incorporate, for instance, Charlotte Mason's way of doing things, it makes the purpose more meaningful and the practice, and you're more apt to follow it. What she says, that's the first thing. But also, when you're following the principle, when you come to a situation where things are not working out so well, you can take that practice and tweak it. And there are times when you have to. You cannot follow a practice exactly, and not everybody can do that. Some people can, but some of us can't. Like, I can't follow the idea of short lessons exactly as Charlotte Mason is, and I don't want to, because it leads to legalism, and it doesn't help with educating your child. It just traps you and keeps you in a mindset that is you're captive to what other people say and not what is wise for your family. Does that make sense? So learn the principle of the subject. It makes the practice more meaningful, and then you can tweak it to fit your family. So example, for my home, for many years with Charlotte Mason, let me rephrase this. Charlotte Mason talks about having 3 streams of history. In grade 1 to 3, they have 1 stream. Grade 4 to 6, they have 3. They have 3. And then as you get older, they get, I think 4. Well, I used to try to do that. But that makes a lot of reading for me when I had difficult readers. Second of all, it means I have to read my older kids' readings, plus I have to read to my younger kid, which makes my days long. And it's just not doable. It's hard. Okay? And so I went and I read her the sections on history in her book. In her books, she has 2 sections, one in volume 1 and one in volume 6. And I found out what was the purpose of history. And then I found out what are the principles that she uses to study history. And she said, you start with your own country. Makes sense. I can do that. And then she says, in grade 4 to 6, she says you should have a neighboring country that you're learning about, their history. And that helps with avoiding arrogance of our own and ignorance. Makes sense. But, and then she said for 4 and 6 also cover ancient history, because you can, in her time, which was in the late 1800s, they couldn't follow chronological ancient history like we can today. We can literally follow chronological history from the ancients all the way to today in a chronological order, but she couldn't. They had separate books for each subject. So she had 3 streams. That's why she had 3 streams. So, but I don't have to do that. So I took the principle of having my country and having a corresponding history going at the same time. Sorry, I'm shaking here. My elbows are getting sore. Sorry, hold on. And so in our home, we do Canadian history because we're Canadian. And then what we do is we do world history alongside Canadian history. And a lot of people suggest Canadian history with British history, or Canadian history with British history and ancient history. Well, we did ancient history a few years ago. I'm not going to repeat it. I don't have to, because it was, we do a cycle of 4 years. Every 4 years we go through world history. We start with the ancients, and over time we build up to the present time in 4 years. Well, I'm not going to have 3 streams, because I cannot do it, first of all. And second of all, the principle is to have 2 histories going on that correspond to one another in time period. So I have Canadian and I have world history. I don't do British history. I tried. I used to try to do Canadian history, British history, American history, and we have, here in Canada, we have some French history. So do I add that one in too? It was just getting overwhelming. So I said, no more. I'm going to do Canadian history and world history. And world history has all that other stuff in it. And so that's what we do, and we're happy with that. If my child wants to read British history on their own, I'm like, here's the book, go for it. But I am not going to stress myself about having to follow a practice so exactly that it traps me, that it puts me into bondage rather than freeing me. Does that make sense? Because it's so, so important. And that's what I used to do, and I am not going to go there again. So I hope that was helpful. It's not about following, I wrote it here, it's not about following the law. That is a big thing in the homeschooling world right now. But it's about using principles, and true principles are unchanging. But they can be applied to different contexts, and their practices may be applied in different ways for each of these contexts and still get a similar result. So that's what I follow. And it has helped me so much. So much. And, okay. I'll say this last point. I plan generally 1 to 2 books each subject. Literature's the only one that I actually have a lot more of. And like I'll have 3 to 4 books for that one. But that is generally my plan. And yes, I cut books. I used to struggle with cutting books, like hugely struggling. I'm going to switch hands here, sorry. And because I thought, well, if I cut books, they're going to miss out on anything. Well, I had to really work through that mindset because it was a wrong mindset. And I now cut books without guilt. I know my children's abilities to read, and I know how fast we can read, and I know how fast we can go through a book, and I know how important it is to discuss things. And I only have so much time, and so I plan more. I'll be honest with you, I do plan more, but when I actually make my schedule, and I figure out how many pages we have to cover every day and so on and so forth, and how much time we have to cover that content, if I cannot fit it in, I will cut the second book without guilt now. Because my first book is the most important, first of all. And second of all, we can't just do it all. And they have a lifetime to learn stuff. This is not about filling our children with knowledge so that when they get to university, they know it all. That is not right. I used to do that, guys. I used to think that because I used to do classical education, and that's how I thought. I was just going to prepare my kids for university so that when they got to university, it would be so easy. Well, you can't do it. You can't. Trust me. They get overwhelmed. The kids can't do it. And it's also not about being perfect. That's vanity. That's, pride. We have to really check our motives when we homeschool and why we're homeschooling. And if we follow principles, we won't be as tempted to fall into the wrong motives. Does that make sense? And the wrong purposes. Because they will give us a really good guide. And so those are just some things that I do. Over the next little while, I'll share what I actually use in my curriculum and how I do it. I'm just seeing if I missed anything on my list. I will share what books I use. I'll go subject by subject because there's a lot. But I've learned a lot, and I want to share this with you guys so that you guys can avoid the mistakes that I made. And I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, you can ask me. I don't know it all. I'm going to be honest, I don't know it all. I just want to say that right up front. I am not a know-it-all. I'm not. Like, people who meet me in person, yes, teach them to love learning and they will teach themselves. Yes, that is true. But I do have a caveat with that one. Teach your children to love to learn, yes. Teach them how to learn, yes. But do not leave them alone learning. That's dangerous. Because children need to learn that they cannot rely on their thinking 100%. Our minds are not 100% reliable. That's why we need the Holy Spirit. That's why we need the Word of God. Because we can actually logically convince ourselves of something wrong. You can argue anything into error. And so I make sure that my kids are reading the books, but I'm reading them with them, one, so that I can learn, okay, because I don't know everything, and two, so that I can have discussions with them and talk about the ideas and the concepts, because real education is about having your child really learn the concepts. The facts are important, but they're not primary. They just help put things into place, okay? But they're not the key. The key is the ideas. And so when you're talking about world history, let's say, and you're talking about why something happened, an event happened, you want to go, well, how did the people feel beforehand? What caused this war? Why did the war happen? And they have to, from the readings, they have to put it, and they say, well, these people were not happy. These poor people were not happy, and they were mad at the rich people because they had all this money and land, and the poor people were doing all the work, and that's why they need to know that. They need to make those connections. And so when you're having discussions, you can ask them questions and you can guide them into learning that. And that's important because that's ethics. That's character. And you can ask them, well, why did this person in this story choose this outcome? Why do you think that they went this direction? Because they need to know. And stories are really good to teach character. You're not pointing out your finger at somebody you personally know and showing their errors. You're actually using a character in the book. And so they can see the cause and effect of somebody's character. Well, why did this person do it? Well, they were thinking this. Well, why did they think that? Because they felt this way. Well, why did they feel that way? Because so-and-so treated them that way. Well, did they have a choice in how they felt? Well, I don't know. Well, what do you think? When somebody treats you bad, do you have a choice in how you respond? And it makes them think. And you're molding their character and how they think and how they respond. I mean, it's massive wonderfulness. Does that make sense? And so you really, really want to be involved in your kids' education, because if you're not, you're going to leave your kids alone. And there's a scripture in the Word of God that says, A child left to himself will bring shame to his mother, and I will guarantee you that happens. Yeah. I have let my kids read their stuff on their own, and it brought me some shame. And I had to rework some of it. And thankfully, my kids were open. And we've reworked it, and we've figured it out, and they have the right mindset. But you can't do that. Don't do that. So I will share. I'm going to stop now because I just keep on going on, and I don't want to just keep on. So if you have any questions, please share, because I really sometimes don't know what to share. Sometimes I'm like, well, they probably know that, and they probably know this, and I would really just love to pour into you guys what I've learned. And again, I don't know everything. There's some things I just don't know, and if I don't know, I'll find out, and I'll get somebody who does. I'll interview people. I have no issues. You guys know. I'm totally comfortable in front of the camera now. I've done this long enough. And so I would love to bring on other people on. If you have any questions, I'll share my ideas, and I'll bring on other people who can help answer those questions. Okay. So, I'll stop now. There. So does anybody have any questions right now? Other than Jessica had a really good point. I loved her point. Jessica, that was a great statement. I loved that about drawing your kids to love to learn. Yeah, it's so important. But don't leave them alone. Not good. You're responsible for your children's minds. Very much so. So, okay. There's no more other questions right now, I don't think. I'm going to just scroll here. I love that you all joined me. This is so awesome. All right. So if you have any questions, again, I'm going to say this for the 40th time. Ask me. And I will try to answer it as best as I can. Other than that, you guys have a great day. And we'll talk to you tomorrow.